Trump wants to forge an alliance with Russia to defeat China, but this plan is doomed to fail. I'll show you why now. Since the beginning of his second term, Donald Trump has been pursuing a rapprochement with Putin. Already on the 12th of February, he had a phone call with the Russian president. The Ukrainian president was only informed about it afterward. This diplomatic breakthrough by the Kremlin simultaneously showed Kyiv where future priorities will lie. Of course, it was expected that Trump would speak with Putin. But given the alliance with Ukraine, such a phone call should have taken place after one with the Ukrainian president. On the same day, the new US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said that NATO membership for Ukraine would not happen.
Also, US President Donald Trump does not see the country becoming a NATO member as part of a peace plan.
Here on the channel, I have already explained several times in the past why Ukraine's membership was not to be expected. The notion that Ukraine could be admitted to NATO while an unresolved conflict with Russia is still simmering is simply absurd. A frozen front can thaw at any time, and a Ukraine that lays claim to territories then held by Russia also risks triggering a new conflict at any moment. An Article 5 that applies only to the territory held by Ukraine is also not a solution, as it could A. prompt Russia to strike again before ratification, or B. could at least theoretically tempt Ukraine to provoke a new conflict in order to reclaim its territory with NATO's help. The risk is too high in both cases for a Ukrainian membership to become a reality. However, a US government official explained this to the international press, giving the logical conclusion a sense of finality and official recognition. Only 2 days later, on February 14th, the US Vice President spoke at the Munich Security Conference. Instead of addressing the Ukraine war as expected at the conference, he launched a vehement ideological attack on the European allies, stating that, according to Vance, they had strayed from shared values, which he considered a far greater threat than Russia. On the same day, he also said, "It is ridiculous that the United States is taking a stance where we are trying to push Russia into the hands of the Chinese." 4 days later, the foreign ministers of the USA and Russia shook hands in Riyadh and agreed on an improvement of bilateral diplomatic relations.
In the Saudi Arabian capital Riyadh, talks between representatives of the USA and Russia have begun. The meeting is attended by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and senior officials. It is expected that the two sides will discuss ways to end the conflict in Ukraine and restore American-Russian relations.
Just 1 day later, on the 19th February, Trump accused Ukraine of starting the war and demanded new elections in Ukraine, which are prohibited by the constitution during wartime. A day later, he called the democratically elected Ukrainian president a dictator. On the 26th February, US Secretary of Defense Pete House stated that for the United States, preventing a war with China in the Pacific is a priority. 2 days later, on the 28th February, the incident at the White House occurred when the Ukrainian president was attacked in front of live cameras, aimed by J.D. Vance and Trump, and then was thrown out of the White House.
The man who had recently called him a dictator, hence the serious expressions during the greeting. Minutes later, an incident occurs in front of live cameras. Trump and Zelensky interrupt each other, raising their voices. You are playing with the lives of millions of people. You are playing with World War III. What you are doing here is very disrespectful to this country, which has given you far more than many people think it should have. This is a resistance for you.
Much more than many people said you should have.
During the meeting, Donald Trump said that Putin went through the witch hunt of the Russia hoax with him, thus referring to Putin as a fellow sufferer. A day later, Trump stopped all cyber command planning against Russia. Just 2 days later, the USA stopped all aid and all intelligence cooperation with Ukraine, which was only reversed after days. How much the lack of information from the USA was responsible for the collapse in Kursk is disputed, but it happened simultaneously. This series of gestures towards Russia shows a clear pattern. Trump wants to detach Russia from China, no matter the cost. The repeated rapprochement with Russia, Trump's trust in Putin, the pressure directed solely against Ukraine, while Russia did not have to give an inch in negotiations, have caused great consternation. This can be explained by the desire to approach Russia at the expense of China, at the cost of Ukraine and Europe. Trump is obviously trying to emulate Richard Nixon here, who opened the USA to China in 1972. The American president used the Sino-Soviet rift to contain the Soviet Union. Trump apparently wants to do the same, only this time with reversed roles between Beijing and Moscow. By opening up to Moscow, by easing or even lifting sanctions and a de facto recognition of the annexations, Washington could, according to the theory, bring Russia back at a distance from China. For decades, the USA, building on the Western alliance, has pursued a containment strategy against both Russia and the People's Republic of China. Trump's focus is on China, as his trade war also shows. He wants to detach Russia from the alliance with China. The basic idea is that continued opposition to Russia pushes it into the arms of China. If both connect more closely and cooperate more closely economically and militarily, it means the greatest threat to US hegemony. China alone is already a serious challenge. A real alliance between China and Russia, which currently does not exist, would significantly increase the difficulty. China has now surpassed the USA as the largest trading power and has made significant progress in the future technology of artificial intelligence. Its semiconductor production is rising rapidly, and its work on quantum computers is advancing quickly. The Chinese Navy already has more ships than the US Navy, and it threatens the US's maritime dominance in the Pacific. Meanwhile, China is creating partners, allies, and bases in Africa, Latin America, and even Europe with the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative. In light of this development, the Ukraine war and the threat posed by Russia are secondary for Donald Trump. Russia remains a geopolitical competitor, but not one that seriously threatens the USA, and furthermore, one whose main effort is concentrated on Europe, where the NATO allies have significant potential of their own, even if they have not currently utilized it. By reducing or even completely stopping aid to Ukraine and decreasing pressure on Moscow, Trump can also encourage Putin to continue. The attempt to force European partners to increase defense spending by making protection dependent on the level of expenditures weakens Article 5 of NATO, on which the entire alliance rests. A withdrawal of the USA from Europe could tempt Putin to expand his geopolitical ambitions within Europe, even with military means. If Washington abandons its ally Ukraine, the Trump administration also endangers the European allies, who would see themselves as immediately threatened after a Russian victory in Ukraine. The betrayal of Ukraine will thus also be understood as a betrayal of the European NATO, which significantly damages the alliance. Coupled with a trade war that includes even the closest partners and expressed territorial ambitions towards allies, Trump weakens NATO and pushes the rest of NATO to look for other alliance partners. The additional defense expenditures required due to the uncertainty of the alliance with the USA are flowing, increasingly into the domestic economy to become independent from an increasingly erratic Washington, which weakens the US defense industry and thus also the US armed forces, and furthermore reduces US influence on Europe. The fact that negotiations with Russia are taking place without the participation of European partners and Ukraine affronts important allies like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Poland, which will force a closer alignment within Europe and thus a Europe increasingly independent from Washington. If you like what you've heard so far, then subscribe to the channel and click the bell. And I like that. Thank you very much. Trump's plan, however, will fail. During the Cold War, there were vehement ideological differences between Moscow and Beijing. China saw Russia as a serious threat. Both sides had prepared for a hot war involving nuclear weapons. As the lesser evil, it was easy for the USA to exploit this division to improve relations with the People's Republic of China. While the relationship between China and Russia today is not a love marriage, as I explained in another video, both are united by a rejection of Western dominance. Both nations benefit from close cooperation. China can purchase urgently needed resources from Russia, including oil and gas, which do not have to be shipped, and therefore cannot be stopped at sea in the event of a conflict with the USA. At the same time, Russia can purchase machinery and products for its defense industry from China as needed. In joint military exercises, they can support each other just as they do in international organizations, whether it be BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The possibilities of decisively separating Russia and China are hardly present. If the USA recognizes the demands of either side, be it the Russian side. On a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, or the Chinese on Taiwan, this does not guarantee a rift between Moscow and Beijing, but only a weakening of the US alliance system. The demonstrated appeasement would disturb the existing alliance partners and make them wonder if they will be abandoned next. While it would encourage Russia and China to carry out further aggressions, even with firmness, such as economic or military means, the USA cannot separate Russia and China from each other as long as both see the USA as the greatest opponent of their global ambitions, which is inevitably the case with a strong USA. However, all of this also ignores another essential factor. Russia can expect continuity in China, but not in the USA. In just 2 years, Donald Trump could noticeably lose his ability to act after the midterm elections if he loses his narrow lead in both houses. In less than 4 years, there could be a new president in the White House who will immediately try to renew the alliance with Europe and declare Russia as the main adversary again. Had Putin meanwhile left Xi Jinping in favor of the Americans, he would then be caught between a rock and a hard place. Nixon and Kissinger were able to open China, because Russia and China were enemies and had already fought each other. Both had actively prepared for a potentially nuclear war against each other. In contrast, the USA was the considerably lesser evil from China's perspective. Today, Russia and China have a complementary economic relationship, and the competition for leadership has already been decided. China is not threatened by Russia, and Russia has effectively accepted its status as secondary. So if the plan is to win Russia over against China, the plan will fail spectacularly. Not only will Russia not be won over, but Trump is simultaneously alienating the USA's most important allies, and encourages them to adopt a confident, independent foreign policy from America. Independent foreign policy to begin. In the end, America stands alone, without friends, without trust, and weaker than ever. Trump will not only fail with Russia, he will spectacularly destroy the USA's position in the world. What do you think? Is there a way to separate Russia from China? Write it in the comment section. Thank you for your attention and see you soon. At this point, my heartfelt thanks also go to the supporters on YouTube as well as on Patreon. In particular, I would like to thank Lieutenant Colonel Latex Oblivion, as well as Lieutenants Uwe Dufresne, Nickname 2Bib, Carsten Schultz, Sascha Horvath, Gulashnasha 4000, Tequila 42, Stefan Badass Lawyer, Andreas Donald Dr. Knut Brandes, Anningham, Anti-X, Eustress, Henning Line Went Alone. Many heartfelt thanks. Without them, it wouldn't be possible like this.